Good morning. You're just having too much fun talking, aren't you? Anybody excited about the game today? Yeah, it doesn't really matter now, does it? Commercials. Patriots, anyone? Giants? Okay. Okay, so I just kind of want to lead up. Tebow's gone. He's not in the. Okay. A little coup because Steve hates the Patriots, so because of that, I so want to root for them. You know. Anyways, welcome to Westgate. It's good to be with you. My name's Ryan Ingram. I lead a thing called Awakening here on Sunday nights that we're actually going to be launching as a church in September, and very excited about that. But we're in a series called What If We All? And Steve, the last 2 weeks, talked about what if we all were rich and kind of flipped the paradigm for us. Because the reality is I know there's lots of us in many different places, but the reality of where we live, not necessarily compared to what's around us, but where we live in the world, we are in the upper echelon. And that most of us in this room would be rich. And the Bible doesn't talk a lot about how to get rich, but it talks a lot about how to be rich. And then last week, Steve talked on how to be generous. What if we all were generous? And I just love that thought of you beginning to think about the collective capacity of the people of God. And what's amazing is that's what's happening here at Westgate. That's what you all are a part of. And as he just began, and if you didn't hear it, and I'll mention it again later in the message this morning, but if you didn't hear it, go back and listen, because I think it's so fun to hear what if we all were in this together and seeing how God is using this church to advance his kingdom here and around the world. And you're a part of that. And God is doing an amazing work. This morning, and for whatever reason, I got this one. What if we all were smart? I'm like, seriously. Thank you, Steve. Why'd you have to not be here this one? But I just got to make a confession. I know I am not the smartest person in this room. I'm okay with that. And I know even on the subject that we're talking about, we've been talking about stewardship and on finances. I am by no means an expert. In fact, most of what I've learned has been through extremely hard knocks. And so as we begin, why don't I just pray? Because I think I needed a little bit more this morning on what if we all were smart. Jesus, thanks for our time together. Thanks for bringing us here. I ask that you would just speak, that even as we talk, that some of our defenses would go down, and Holy Spirit, you would have your way. That there would just be a sense of your movement and your word would dwell deeply in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. And you can actually turn me down a little bit. I'm going to get probably louder, and you may not like that. But I just love the question, what if we all were smart? And I know we're talking more on the financial side, but as I thought about what if we all were smart, I began to think about, like, driving. Yeah. I mean, what if we all were smart drivers? I mean, think about that. You wouldn't have traffic because that one person wouldn't be in the far lane driving 40 miles an hour. And you wouldn't have that crazy person that's zipping everywhere. I just think about this. What if we all were smart parkers? You know, sometimes I drive in and I look at it and I said, man, park like a Christian. Seriously, right? But here's the problem, because our society has this preoccupation with smartness. education, information, of just trying to get smarter. And we just have subtly bought into this: if we know more, life will get better, right? Is the more we know, the better we'll be. And we've kind of just bought into that reality. The more we know, the better we'll be. But here's the problem, because I believe we've kind of made a category error. Is you know, and I know, lots of smart, way smarter than us, brilliant people who have made unwise and foolish decisions, right? And it wasn't their smartness. It wasn't that they didn't have enough information. See, now here's the principle. It's not about being smart. It's about living wisely. It's not necessarily about having more information. It's about knowing what to do with that information, applying it. It's about living wisely. See, in our society, we put so much emphasis on information, but very little on instruction. How to actually go about living wisely. In fact, here's just some examples of smart people making unwise decisions. 90% of the people in our culture buy things they can't afford. 48% of Americans could cover less than 1 month's expense if they lost their income. The USA Today reported that 56% of Americans do not systematically prepare for retirement age by investing. 60% of people do not pay off their credit cards every month. Wow. Credit card users spend 12 to 18% more when using a credit card instead of cash. 78% of Americans said they would borrow on a credit card if a rainy day came. The American Bankruptcy Institute revealed that 69% of filers say credit card debt caused their bankruptcy. Now, let's talk about America's elite, the educated, the next generation, the ones that we're passing our future off to. The average college student pays $5,000 more per year to live and eat off campus than to live in the dorm and eat cafeteria food. Student loans were needed not just to earn their degree, but to look good while doing it. 80% of graduating college seniors have credit card debt before they even have a job. This one will blow you away a little bit, at least it did me. Most Americans carry a car note for their entire lives, paying around $378 a month. Some way more. That same amount invested by age 25 to retirement would on average amount to more than $4 million by the age 65. Hope you enjoyed the car. See, it's not about being smart. My assumption is in this room is filled with smart people. That I'm talking to a group that on average is probably smarter than me. But it's not about being smart. It's about being wise. See, the wise understand it's not necessarily what you know, but what you do with what you know that makes all the difference. It's not necessarily what you know, and information is important. You have to know the right information. But wisdom is the application of the right knowledge at the right time in the right way. See, so much of us, we have the right information, we just do nothing about it. You can click to the next one as people are wanting to fill in that slide, the wise understand. There you go. Did you know that Jesus never talked about getting smarter? You know, in fact, the Bible, it's filled with all about how to be wise, how to live wisely, but it speaks nothing about getting smarter. It's amazing. There's a book in the Bible that is devoted solely to wisdom. It's called Proverbs. There's literature in the Old Testament called the wisdom literature. That as you look at it, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Proverbs, Psalms, that is talking about living wisely. If we're going to make a change, we got to shift from trying to be smarter to start living wisely. Because it doesn't matter what you know. It matters what you do with what you know. That makes all the difference. In fact, Jesus tells this parable. It's an amazing parable, and people have had so much problems with this over the years because he uses a bad example to make a good point. And he takes a bad guy and says, look, if this guy who's a bad example gets it, understands this principle about wisdom, how much more should you, people of the light, get it? And he tells this story about the shrewd manager. And the shrewd manager was this manager who actually was just squandering his boss's wealth. He gets caught. He's pulled into the office and he says, look, I've heard what's going on. You're fired. You know what? Bring the accounts to me and you're done. Well, the shrewd manager, he sits and thinks to himself very astutely and he says, you know what? I'm too weak to dig. And I'm too proud to beg. So what am I going to do that's going to help me in the future? And he says, I have a window of time where I still have access to my boss's files. And he goes to all of his boss's, people who had loaned from him. He says, hey, what do you have? 800 gallons of olive oil. Great. Here, take the note. Quickly, write it down. Cut that in half. Make it 400. Then he goes to the person with the wheat. Says, hey, how much do you owe my boss? 1,000 bushels of wheat. Great. What you do, cut that down to 800 bushels. Because he leveraged his now. And what's amazing is the boss, he's still fired. Don't get me wrong. He's still fired. The boss looks at him and commends him. He says, you were shrewd in your dealing. You were able, you figured out how to leverage now for life later. And you did it in such a way that it actually made me look good. I didn't like it. I lost money on it, but in the community, I looked generous. And commended him for his shrewdness. And Jesus tells this moral of this story of just simply saying, the wise people of the world leverage the little they have for life later. And he brings it to apply to us as believers, and he says, then wise people leverage what they have now for eternity later. And then he hits this huge principle that every wise person knows and applies and does. And this principle is so simple that as we uncover it, as we unpack it, and then we're going to kind of go into details on it, you're going to go, well, yeah, of course. See, what separates being smart and being wise is what you do. See, wise people not only know this principle, and you know it, I guarantee you, 90% of you know it. It's what you do with it that makes all the difference. Look at what Jesus said, Luke 16:10. You find this powerful principle that every wise person knows. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Here's the principle. The little things matter. Every wise person understands this. The little things matter almost more than the big things. The little things are what build the moments so that the big things are great. And we spend our energy in society just focused on the big, and yet we've not done the little, the entrustment with the little to prepare for the big. And we know this, we get this. Character is built in the little, right? I mean, character doesn't happen overnight. Character doesn't happen because you had this big moment where you had to step out and kind of pull out your Superman vest and you show up and you go, look at me. Character happens over the little of making choices. I will not violate my integrity. I will walk faithfully. I will speak justly. And you make these little decisions, and it's in the moments of crisis, in the big moments of life, that character is revealed, but it is not made. We get this in a relationship side of things too, right? We know that relationships are not built on the big. And yet we spend so much energy, so many of us, on the big things of life. We spend so much energy on the wedding day, but not a whole lot on the marriage. And a successful relationship is built on the little. Doesn't matter how many extravagant gifts you give. Doesn't matter how many great vacations you go on. If the little isn't built up, those all are hollow, right? That's why when I do premarital counseling with couples, I just share this, say, if you put as much energy, time, and focus into your marriage as you do your wedding day, you're going to have a great marriage. But most of us don't do that because we don't apply the principle of the little. See, and here's the reality. I don't know if you caught it, but God is a shrewd, wise investor. Did you know what the little is in this passage? What was it? You can look, you can cheat, you can read, okay? What was the little? Just check. Come on. So if you have not been trustworthy in worldly wealth. Did you notice that worldly wealth is the little thing to God? That he's put an entrustment with you, with what you have, and says, I'm going to entrust and see if I can trust you with more. That's the principle of the little in your life with God. He says, I'm going to entrust you with what you have now, this worldly wealth. And as you steward that faithfully, then I will entrust you with greater things. I will entrust you with impact. I will entrust you with influence. I'll entrust you with a life of significance, with a family. I'll entrust you with these things, but you're not trustworthy in the little. See, God is a shrewd and wise investor. So with the remainder of our time, let's just simply look at how to be wise in the little things. This is just kind of the nuts and bolts of, if that is true, then the question is, how are we going to be wise in the little things of life, specifically with our money? How do we do it? Now, for some, here's the reality. You know this. We're not going to cover anything new. For some, you know this, and you just know, I actually just need to start doing this. For some, you know this, and you're already doing it, and you need to come along. Others of us that go, hey, how can I help? How can I support? How can I be on your team? And others, this is going to feel like, oh my gosh, shoot me now. Because you don't know my story, Ingram. You don't know where I've been. You don't know how hard life's been the last 3 months. And our tendency is when something becomes really overwhelming and it becomes bigger than we can handle at times, and that we just avoid it, right? We just go, you know what, I'm just not even going to deal with that. Nothing will change. It will never happen. You're right. If you treat it that way, nothing will change. It will never happen. It'll be the way I treated. I owned a home in Georgia, and we had a leak in our water heater. I just figured, hey, I'll ignore it. It'll get better. It did not. In fact, what happened was, because I didn't address the problem then, as the leak continued, and it was right next to the pantry. I actually had a pantry then, not a cupboard. A pantry. Then mold began to grow all throughout the pantry. Had to rip out all the sheetrock. See, the reality is it only grows bigger and gets harder. I'd encourage you, for some, there's this mental block, this resistance of like, this is hard. I get it. I understand it's hard. Get help. We're going to talk about nuts and bolts and how to do this. But don't keep avoiding it, because avoiding doesn't address the issue and it just keeps growing. Okay? How to be wise in the little. The first area is to think buckets before budgets. Think buckets before budgets. See, buckets are values, are principles. Buckets are the why. It's what holds the reason you do what you do. And the reason I think buckets before budget was because this was instilled at me in a young age. When I was a kid, I was about 5, 6, 7, my parents got me a little bucket. And I had 3 of these buckets. And they instilled really 4 values that we're going to talk about. And like I said, I am by no means a great financial planner guy. But these values have saved me over and over and over. But they had these 3 buckets. One said save, one said spend, and one said give. And as I went out and worked and mowed lawns around the neighborhood or, got birthday money, I'd go and I'd put, if I had $10, I'd put 1 in there, and give, 1 in save, and then 8 in the in spend. Here's what's fun. I just noticed this as I was digging this out. This is the real one. I had dinosaurs. My kids were looking at it. They're all excited, like, Dad, you like dinosaurs too? I'm like, yeah, I like dinosaurs too. But it says save, and it's purposeful. It says bike on the top. I was saving for, I remember, a BMX bike. And I remember saving up and buying that. What a cool thing, though, as a kid to know that I was able to set aside money and then eventually buy the bike that I wanted, and it just wasn't all handed to me. That's huge, and we're just starting that actually with our kids as well, of just starting those bins and those buckets. But here's the reason. Buckets determine the value. Budget determines the how or the what. Buckets determine why you do what you do. Budgets determine how you're going to go about it, okay? And most of us, we try to address the problem with the budget and we start to get in it, but we don't even know why we're doing it. We're just like, I want to get out of debt. Let's talk about big values. The first one, make it honestly, don't steal it. Bucket number 1. Make it honestly, don't steal it. Listen to what Proverbs 11:1 says. The Lord hates cheating, but delights in honesty. Dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. This is one of those this is a value that you just embrace. You go, okay, you know what? There's a lot going on in the workplace. There's a lot in the way people are treating their tax returns, but I'm going to decide before God to make it honestly. I'm going to decide that I'm not going to cheat my employer out of time and out of resources. I'm going to decide that I'm not going to cheat what the government says they owe, even though I disagree. I'm not going to earn stuff on the side and make sure it stays under the table. You go, well, wait a second. Ingram, everybody else I know is doing it. That's great. You know what Paul wrote? He said, whatever you do, whether in word and deed, do it all unto the name of the Lord Jesus. You know what that means? That means at work, at home, whatever you do and whatever you say, that you're not working for a physical boss. You're not even working to make sure you have a clean home or any of those sort of things. You say, Jesus, would you be proud of this? I know my boss is a jerk at work, and I know everyone's doing this, but I want to present it to you and say, I work for you. What do you think? See, that's one of the deep values. Make it honestly. Don't steal it. Second value then, save it faithfully. Don't waste it. Proverbs 21:20 says, the wise man saves for the future, but the foolish man spends whatever he gets. And I worked in high school ministry and junior high ministry for about 10 years. And as I worked, we'd take all these trips. And as we took all these trips, it was amazing to watch, especially junior hires. We'd get on this bus, and we'd be going like to Hume Lake or somewhere, and we'd get on this bus, and we'd drive, and there was always a stop. And, these junior hires had this pocket full of money that the mom gave them that was burning a hole, and they're counting it on the way up, and they're all excited, and I have a $20 bill. I've never had that before. And they're just so excited. And then we hit a gas station. They get off. And they spend all their money. There's a proverb that says, a fool and his money will soon be departed. I watch that every trip. They get off, they spend all their money in that moment. They get on the bus, and they're like the coolest kids for a season, because until the candy runs out. But inevitably what happened is the bus ride home, I'd get a tug on my shirt. Ryan, yeah, I don't have any money for dinner tonight. Oh, well, why not? Well, I don't have any money. Did your mom give you money? Yeah. I spent it all on the ride up. All right, and let me just say this gently, okay? Could it be that some of us are still operating with a junior high mentality towards our money? That what comes in just goes out. In fact, statistically, Americans on average spend 110% of their income. So it's even worse than just what comes in, what goes out. We leverage what we don't have. And that you would go, you know what, one of the foundational principles, one of the values, one of the bucket areas of my life is I'm going to save for the future so that my kids don't worry about having to support me when I'm older. I can support them. In fact, that's what Proverbs 13:22 says. A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. I like that a lot. That's what I want to do. That's what I've watched my parents do so wisely as each of our kids have been born and they've had grandkids, and then my other brothers have had kids. You know what they do right when they're born? They open a college savings account, a college account for them. And every year they put money into it, and they invite us to be a part of that. You know what they're doing? They're leaving an inheritance for their children's children. Make it honestly, save it faithfully, and then spend it wisely. Spend it wisely. Don't abuse it. Proverbs 21:5 says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. Here's the question you got to ask here. What is the wisest thing to do? What is the wisest choice and use of God's money? To spend it wisely, you have to discern the difference between what is nice and what is necessary. See, in our culture, in our environment, and Apple has done a great job of letting us know that new is not just nice, it's necessary. iPhone 4, it's got an S on it, so I gotta have it. What's different? I don't know. It has an S on it. See, an iPhone is nice. It is not necessary. The American dream, by the way, is nice. It is not necessary. That amazing dream vacation is nice. It is not necessary. That perfect car that makes you look good when you drive up to drop the kids off is nice. But it is not necessary. In fact, I have to ask this question: what is the wise use of God's money every time I go to Costco? I'm telling you, I am an impulsive shopper. And I see things and I go, I must have that. It's so bad for us brothers that we were on vacation this summer and my brother was about to go to Costco and his wife's like, don't let him go by himself. Because they know if we go by ourselves, we'll come back with things that we should not have. Like a kayak, what do you mean? Like, of course, absolutely we need a kayak. Now listen to what I'm not saying. See, because here's what happens inevitably, and we get some people that get into this legalistic mode of what is the wise use, and you begin to get so rigid in your box. And I was there about a year ago, actually a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we budgeted, and we were really being intentional, and we were putting our kids in school and going like, okay, we're going to strap down. And at that moment, we were giving more than we'd ever given in our lives. We were saving more than we were ever saving, and we were miserable. I mean, absolutely miserable. And what I learned is last year was sometimes the wisest thing you can do is plan for fun. Because it was like, what good is it to have so much money in the bank account and I don't even like the people or have fun with the people that are in my home? And so we just began to go, you know what, we're going to save a little less and we're going to have fun as a family. We're going to save a little less, and I'm going to go on weekly date nights with my wife. Thank you for clapping. That's great. Yeah, it doesn't really work after the fact, does it? I should have clapped. Yeah. Spend it wisely. Don't abuse it. The fourth bucket is give it generously. Don't hoard it. And I mentioned it earlier. Steve talked on this last week. It was great. If you weren't here, go listen to the CD. Understand the balance between sacrifice and joy. Proverbs says this: he who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. He will reward him for what he has done. I love that, just that imagery. When you're kind to the poor, and this is true, some of you walked in, you're like, okay, give. I get it. Now I'm in a church, give. Do not give here. This is not about you giving here, but if you don't know, if you're like going, I'm not even a Christian, giving is for you, you're going like, I leverage what you have. You want to leverage what you have for eternal purposes or for even a greater purpose in this world? He who's kind to the poor lends to the Lord. I love that. But let me just say, this is the order. Give, save, spend. Give, save, spend. Make that the valuation of how you go about your finances. Give, save, spend. Because here's what happens. This is what we do. Right? Spend, save, give. But no, that's not really what happens, because if we spend, that's all that happens. Right? Oh, I'm sorry, that got convicting. I apologize. You're like, oh, that hurt a little bit. Spend, save, give. What happens when you do that is you spend, and you realize you had good intentions. Oh, I really wanted to give, or oh, I really wanted to save, but all of a sudden, it's just gone. It will never be of value until you say, you know what, at the beginning of the month, when I get the paycheck, I'm going to choose to give. There's some basic evaluations on this that over the course of time people said, and I don't really care what you do, but some people have said 10%. This is what I grew up learning. 10% giving, 10% saving, and 80% spending. Here's the reality. Some of you just need to go 1% giving, because 1% of 0% is infinitely more than what you're currently doing. You just go, okay, 1% I'm going to give, 1% I'll save, and then 98% I'll spend. And that may be real. But I encourage you, this is the order. And so oftentimes we mix it up, and good intentions never lead to actually good application. You have to choose ahead of time. The wise understand the little things there. Next, think buckets before budgets, then follow your money. How to be wise in the little thing? You must follow your money. You must become a detective of your money. You must be knowing where your money's going. Because if you don't, then you're not a very good steward of your money. If I remember actually giving one night at Awakening, and I gave $200 out of my own personal money. And I was making a point, but I said, I want you to leverage this for the greatest good for the most amount of people. I gave $100 to one person and $100 to this other person. And I wanted them to come back and report on what they did with my money. It wasn't the church's money, it was my money, $200. I'm like, man, that's a sacrifice for me. But and this one girl came back, she's like, you know what, I fed 1,000 orphans. Not really, but something like that. The other guy didn't come back for a while. Then I saw him and I said, hey man, what'd you do with my money? I spent it. What do you mean? Oh, I don't even know. Food and stuff. What? I'm like, dude, that was my money. That wasn't your money. I was hacked off. I'm curious. As God says, you are a steward of all that I've given you. And yet we don't even track and follow to know how we're using his money. You can't be a very good steward. follow your money. Know where you're spending it. If you've never done this, I guarantee you, you will be shocked. I had no idea when I did this in the early days of our marriage how much I spent at Starbucks alone. I learned to drink black coffee real quick, by the way. See, and the reality of this, too, is that studies show if you just simply begin to write down what you eat, you don't change your diet, but you just begin to track what you eat, you will lose weight. Same happens in the area of your time. We'll talk more about this next week. But you begin to track your time, you'll be more efficient and effective. You begin to track your money. You begin to know where your money's going. For me, this was an extremely hard thing to learn because I'm not detailed. There's 2 tools at the bottom that are so helpful. If you're like me, you're going like, because we have in this insert, and you have this insert here about, hey, how to track your money, and you can just start writing it down and go, okay, I'm going to know the date, what I spent it on, what the category was for. But you're going, man, I don't know I could do that. You know what saved my life and really helped my marriage? It was Quicken. It was a spiritual tool I needed. You're going, I can't afford Quicken. That's great. Mint.com is the same thing, but for free. And it will just automatically track your money. You just input all that, and you just have to begin to look and watch. Follow your money, then set a budget and keep it. You can't set a budget, by the way, until you know where your money's going, until you follow your money. You got to start with there because you don't know what's actually going out. On this side, you have this kind of budget breakdown of actual expenses. So in every category, you can begin, after you follow your money, to begin to track it down. And you're going like, this seems like a lot of work. Yes, up front, it is a lot of work. But then after you get that, you can just begin to make these little corrections. And that's what the next one is. Make constant corrections. See, I often have failed in budgeting of that one principle. I'd go follow your money, great, set a budget, great, and then I push autopilot. And then one of the kids had to go to the ER, a car broke down, some of these sort of things, and all of a sudden the budget was totally blown. Make constant corrections. As you begin to set a budget, and if you need more help on that, the Digging Deeper this week will begin to walk you more specifically through that. You can go online at westgatechurch.org and do that. But then make constant corrections. And what we in our household have just started recently, because we wanted to be able to, how do we make constant correction? And you have to systematize that. You have to structure that. It doesn't naturally, for some of us who aren't as structured as some of you, it doesn't naturally happen for us. So what we have to do is we have to just simply schedule it in to the rhythm of our week. And we started this just recently. It's called Date and Details. Now this isn't our date night out. This is just a time where we call a timeout weekly and say date and details and cover 3 things. We're going to talk about our finances, write any checks, look at where we're at. Talk about our family. Talk about our kids, school, what's next for the future. We began to talk about, what's next for next year with schooling and what do we want to do with our middle son and where he's at, and do we want him to go to the next grade or should he stay where he's at just for more development? And then we start to talk about the future. Take out the calendar and begin to look at, okay, what does this week have? Where are you at? Get in sync as a couple. So oftentimes, in a marriage, you see 2 people living very independent, disjointed lives under one roof and never come together to just simply get in sync. And when we were talking about this in the curriculum team meeting, one of the persons brought up, oh, you mean a business meeting? Now, if that works for you, that's great. It's a business meeting. You just knock it out. I got to have fun a part of what I do. And if I hear business meeting, I rain check, please. Date and details, I'm like, hang out with my wife. We're going to do a little bit of fun. We're going to make it a fun environment, and then we're going to just knock out some things. I'm in. Count me in. Follow your money, set a budget, make constant corrections, then eliminate destructive debt, whether it's credit card or a car note. There's a book called The Millionaire Next Door, not a Christian book by any means, but a great little read. One of the chapter titles, I love this, is You Aren't what you drive. And the reality is so oftentimes we've used in our culture, there was a generation that didn't believe that debt was a tool to get wealthy. And now we buy into this, that debt is a tool to get wealthy. And if you need help on that, there's resources here. The Total Money Makeover at the bottom by Dave Ramsey is a great resource. Again, Master Your Money by Ron Blue. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. Get out of destructive debt. Now, here's what I'm not saying. If you owe money on a home that you can afford, you didn't lose your job, nothing has changed about your circumstances, but you just know that, hey, man, I'm underwater on it now, and everybody else seems to be, just stop paying on it. I just heard of one couple recently that could afford all they did, and they just stopped paying on their house for a year and spent that money however they wanted and then declared Chapter 7. That is ungodly. That does not represent Christ well, and that is not what it means to eliminate destructive debt. Romans 13:7 says, give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. Last thing. Seek outside help if necessary. Do you know that the wisest person that walked the face of the planet, King Solomon, wrote Proverbs, much of it, that he wrote more than any other biblical author about seeking wise counsel? That somehow in our culture, we've got this mentality to seek help is to be weak rather than to be wise. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffer harm. If you're in the place and it just felt like this morning, you just got hit by a fire hydrant. Not even the hose, just the fire hydrant. And you just felt knocked over. Would you have the courage to take the first step of wisdom and seek outside help? In fact, we're doing a class that's in your bulletin. It's a study, Dave Ramsey study. It does cost money. If you can't afford it, let us know. We're going to do things to provide, but you do need to have some skin in the game. It's not going to be for free. I think you should pay for part of it to say, hey, I'm in. But that you would seek outside help. If there's a couple or a family close to you that you know, or someone that you go, man, the way they steward and use their money, that you would go to them. The dangerous thing you can do is sit and be silent and suffer. And that happens every single weekend. Get outside help. Because it's not about being smart. It's not about knowing all the right information. It's about living wisely. It's not what you know, what you do with what you know that makes all the difference. Would you take the very next step to living wisely? Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for time together. Thank you that your word speaks on these things that are so deep and dear to our heart. I pray for each person in this room that you would give them the wisdom to know what to do. And then, Father, that you would give them the courage to do it, even when it's hard. In Jesus' name, amen.